Hello and welcome to Cad Chaos. This is a new sword project that I've been working on lately. I call it the PK Sword, and that stands for is Potential Kinetic Energy Sword. And the thought behind that is from a game mechanics. Usually in a game you'd be fighting with a character, doing sword play or some sort of melee, and usually go on the defense, and the idea behind a defense is to stay alive long enough to make an attack. And the thought behind this sword, at least from a game mechanic standpoint, is that as you're parrying or blocking, you're actually capturing that energy. And the two sides of the coin here are represented by the gem center in the sword, and then the red gem on the back, with the idea that as one builds up, you could then turn it around and deliver it in a more powerful blow so that your defense becomes your offense, which opens up kind of a sword play that was more about strategy than just trying to land either the first hit or stay alive long enough to do so. But enough of that, let's get down to how I actually modeled this in Solidworks here. And it is quite a heavy model, as in there's a lot going on here, so it might take a little bit, but I'm going to try to move very quickly through it. So I started this project with a hand-drawn sketch, which I drew to scale. I then scanned that into my computer and brought the digital image in onto a sketch plane. That way I have some sort of physical reference point of which to model my sword, and I can scale it to size of how big the model I want it to be. In this case, it's going to be right around 60 inches. So it's big, it's like a cloud sword. So I'm going to move very quickly through this model since it is heavy. There's a lot of features, and it's probably the most complicated single model I've ever done. And in hindsight, it probably would have been better to do it chunk by chunk and bring it together as an assembly. But I'm going to start off with the hilt here. And the wrap, I decided to do wrap a little bit differently than I've done in the past. What I did is an oval along a helix, and then I'm going to use a scale feature along one axis, and that squishes it down into kind of an oval helix, something that you would typically put your hands around. I then created some planes and split off the end. I'll later do the same thing on the front. And now I just roughed out the features as I'm going on here using boss extrudes. One important thing to keep in mind is that when I create a boss extrude going inside the feature, I don't want to merge results. Merging results will then combine this extrude with every extrude that it touches. And I want to keep these bodies separate until I know which bodies I want to combine. This is going to help me as far as creating features that don't interact with other features, and also defining colors. So it's a strategic move on my point to create individual solid bodies that I then whittle down to what I want. So moving on, I'm use a lot of chamfers here to break up edges and add a bit of more dimensions to the model. I create a wrap feature using a whole bunch of rectangles that I then wrap around and cut out. That breaks up the counterweight of the sword quite nicely, and then throw in a whole bunch of chamfers that wrap around with it. Moving on, I create a couple of sketches in a plane and split off the front. You'll notice that the wrap remains while the metallic handle is the piece that is actually cut. This part gets hidden inside the hilt later on, so it's not a big deal. I just leave it. So now I'm going to move on. I'm going to boss extrude, kind of rough out what's going on here at the forefront of the hilt. I decided to go with a boss extrude as my base to create a sense of width that is then molded beyond there, because it's going to make my geometry easier as I move to surfacing later on in the video. Now these arms are designed to be individual from the hilt. It's kind of external, it gives it more of a mechanic look, and as the energy would transfer from one to the other, it just kind of, it had a cool effect. And they are not coplanar. Your large ones are going to be farther out than your interior ones. And then I will mirror all this geometry over to the other side of the sword at the end. I then create some boss extrudes off this base plate here, building up to the actual control arms. And then my final step is to combine this base plate with these offsets, which is actually hidden right now, so let me unhide that for you. So now I have one solid body here with a couple of different solid bodies, which are these control arms, and now I'm going to move into surface modeling. And for the sake of this, I'm going to suppress this sketch in the back, which all you have to do is go into your sketch, you see your sketch picture, right click and then suppress. You can click on that sketch and kind of drag it around, and that can get really frustrating when you're trying to work on very individual edges and pick stuff out. So for right now we're going to suppress that. So I create a whole bunch of ruled surfaces off the face here, and I'm kind of defining a limit to where how much I want these control arms to be kind of recessed into the hilt, and then I'll form it according to my eye, how it should look as far as the surfaces are going. I end up using a whole lot of surface lofts and ruled surfaces at the beginning here as I pull the geometry out from the outside edges and then tie it together. There is one unique trick that I kind of learned as I was working through all these surface lofts, and that is, rather than trying to loft from this edge, which is created by the surface, normally I'd get this entire arc, and then I try to loft that arc to this arc right down here, and the geometry just wouldn't work out. So in this case, I ended up creating a 3D sketch that was then based on that actual arc. So then I would only create half of an arc. So I basically just transfer the edge there, make it a body, and make it into a sketch, use a control line that comes off of the center of the arc to a point where I wanted it to cut, and then trim off the rest of the sketch, and then move on and create a surface loft between sketches, not so much between surfaces. So I roll on here, and it took a lot of troubleshooting as far as when I'm creating the surface, where it's going, how it's flowing. But you can, I kind of get it to a point where it's happy, and then when I do surface fills, I'm going to get a nice, smooth finish to the center of this forward part of the hilt, which was quite challenging, and it took a lot of time. But yeah, in my mind, it looks really quite good as far as what I was planning and how it was moving forward. It does have a bit of an edgy look on the head, on the top and the bottom here, but to me, you know, it kind of adds some dimension to the actual forward part of the hilt rather than it all being nice and smooth. As far as, you know, I like it. So I move on, and now the idea here is to cap off the backside of this surface so that I can make it into a solid body, which I'll then combine with that center plate. So for this, I'm going to actually go up here and I'm going to hide that solid body so you can see what's going on. I create some ruled surfaces. I'm going to bring that down beyond the plane I'm going to use to trim them. So I will show you that. So I create some ruled surfaces. Whoa! And I then create a very large surface and use a surface trim command later on to square everything up. So I trimmed everything to a surface, so now everything is on the same plane. So when I move on here, I knit it, now this is all one surface. That entire thing I've brought up from the solid body is now one surface. I now do a surface extrude across the bottom, and then I do a surface trim using that profile created by the other surface. So now there's two surfaces, and I knit them together, which forms a nice solid body. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to unhide this. So there you go, now I got that solid body on the top, and I can now mirror this over, and we can move on to the rest of the sword, combining it all together. So moving on to the sword now, the blade section part of it, I have some interesting geometry going on here. I'm going to be connecting the connector rods to the actual blade itself, and with the theme that the energy runs between the blade and the hilt, I then create some channels from the actual blade into that gem that is in the center of the blade itself. So let's go ahead and break it down. I'm going to hide this sketch picture so that we can move around a little faster. So just like the hilt, my first step is to create some boss extrudes and rough out the geometry. Again, using that sketch as the basis for all my lines. So now I've kind of created that interior gem and a whole bunch of circles and connector rods. I'm then going to do a unique thing, because what I need to do is I need to hollow this boss extrude out using this blade. Now when I go to use a combine feature, I'll use subtract. I'll use this as my base, and then I'll subtract the blade out. The issue is that I don't want to lose the blade, but the command doesn't allow for that. So what I do here is something kind of unique. I mirror that blade back behind the sword. So I've got effectively two blades. Now you might be thinking, what in the world's going on? I then mirror that blade back again. The mirror that I just made, I bring that back over. So now I have two solid bodies in the exact same location. So I effectively have three blades. One, the original blade, the mirror of that blade, and the mirror of that blade. And then I use the command combine using subtract as the effective measure of how I'm going to create that. So I'm going to go inside the command here and show you that. And what that's going to do, it's going to eat those two blades, the mirror and the mirror, and it's going to chop out the geometry that both of these bodies take up. So when I do that, this center gem here is now going to have channels where these little control arms are running. So if I hide this, you can then come in to the center gem and you notice the geometry that it created inside of it. So now comes the process of creating some more rough geometry and making things aesthetically pleasing, because I have essentially what I want to end up with. My profile's correct. So we're going to fast forward through some of this. Whole bunch of fillets, chamfers, and more fillets. As you've got the theme, I use fillets and chamfers to break up geometry. So now everything's starting to look a little bit more smoother. The gem here has nice round edges and a pocket, so everything's starting to flow faster. And things are becoming graphically intensive, and my computer's starting to slow down, so things will start to look a little bit more choppy at this point, but I'm going to do my best to edit the video so that it's all smooth. Moving on, I'm going to create some more boss extrudes up near the control arms here, and that's going to connect the hilt to the sword and make it one flowing object from one end to the other. More fillets, more chamfers, more boss extrudes, more cuts. So what I did is I ended up creating cuts near where these control arms are going to come out, and then created positive boss extrudes inside of them so that there's a gap. And then I started with this theme of, well, there should be these control channels, or if there's a circle, then it should have a line coming off it. That way there's a consistent flow for everything that's going on. So I start with that theme, and then I'm going to create the depressed look into the blade, which I'll then tie together and try to create some sort of cohesive theme to everything that's going on here. And you might be wondering, what is this guy used for? What's the idea of this little pocket up here? Well, my thought is you could tie like a strap around that, and then that'd be something your character could then hold your sword from, or maybe he'd wrap that around his wrist so that he could never be disarmed. So I moved on here, a couple more ribs, a couple more cuts. I'll show you the ribs here in a second. It's kind of an interesting feature. So I've created this cut, and now I have that pocket that I'm going to fill in using the rib command, more because I just wanted to use rib command, not so much because it was ideal, but it does work out. I tie everything together, creating a band between all of these nodes so that everything's connected, kind of like a circuit board. And I already know at this point that it's going to be, we're going to have more of a translucent with a metallic look, and the whole image is together in my brain. It's just ending up in the model now. I'm now going to mirror all these features that have happened here to the other side of the blade, so that the front side and the back side look the same, which is going to be really important when you go to put something in a translucent material, because it obviously wouldn't look right if you could see through it and not see ribs on the other side. And now I'm just going to do a few more things to kind of polish things out. I'm going to create a couple more cut extrudes, and then going to mirror them over. And this is back in the control arms. They looked a little plain, so I added that theme of connector rods, and I moved on and I mirrored those over to the other connector rods on the far side. And then, rather than creating a gem on the top and the bottom of this hilt like I had first initially thought, I thought that was kind of a little too busy. I then used a dome feature to depress those so that there's kind of an abyss look almost from the top of your sword looking down. That there's some sort of... it was just kind of a different look that I wanted to capture. So finishing off all the features I use here, I then dome out the top and the bottom and fillet them so that they are nice and smooth. So what you kind of have is a depressed area that you can then add a different material to just that surface and kind of create an interesting dimension. So that is how I modeled the PK sword, the potential kinetic energy sword. Thank you for watching, and if you like what you see, make sure to subscribe and check in weekly to bi-weekly when I'm posting more videos as I do projects, and maybe just do simple tutorials once in a while. And thanks for watching.